As a society, I think we enjoy questioning success and popularity. We enjoy the idea of something or someone not deserving the status that they hold, which is why we often take issue with a game that is getting attention and or accolades that don't line up with public perception. Pokemon has been a victim of this in the past for one reason or another, but occasionally it has been self-inflicted, where Pokemon has done a thing that doesn't make any sense and has received criticism for it. Listen, I expect certain things from my legendary Pokemon, and while it may sound incredibly entitled, I do get a little miffed if I don't get them. I mean, someone has to. Legendary Pokemon have their own set of criteria in order to be referred to as such, since not every Pokemon is born equal, and some have greatness thrust upon them, or something. They're typically stronger than average and significantly rarer than your standard Pokemon, which often goes hand in hand with each other very nicely. But some legendaries can't keep up and struggle to be viable competitively, or suffer from a lackluster design or something similar. For the record, I'm not including Ultra Beasts or counting pre-evolutions as their own Pokemon like Feony or Cosmog and Cosmo-M, since no one is out there screaming into the void that Magikarp is terrible and a useless pile of crap without having half an eye on the inevitability that is Gyarados. If you only want to use half the facts, make your conspiracy video in your own time.
I enjoy the logical disparity in videos like this because legendary Pokemon should be good, but it's also a lot of fun to see Pokemon that are disappointments and nowhere near as good as they should be. It's not going to keep anyone up at night, but it is interesting to see. You know, some people complain about the national decks, I'll be complaining about legendaries. Different strokes for different folks.
In all of my years of making these videos, I found that people object more to what I put in 10th than what I put at the very top of a list. I guess that makes a little bit of sense, since it's usually the entry I feel the least passionate about, which has a knock-on effect on people who are hoping for it to appear higher, or a general anger that it somehow squeezed its way into a video. I say this because Deoxys has been an incredible Pokemon since its first appearance in the 3rd generation, and its ridiculous stats have allowed it to be a crucially important member of the very highest tiers in competitive Pokemon battling. But that's the thing! Deoxys has this reputation because of its many forms that allow it to play many different roles. Attack Deoxys is frightening, Speed form can be great for setup, and Defense Deoxys is mostly terrible because it's barely got any HP. But then there's the default Deoxys form. I actually don't get the point of this thing. The general spread of stats is heavily linked to a mixed sweeper with huge attack stats and lots of speed to help, which might not sound terrible in isolation because that's actually pretty good. I feel like you'd be alright with this under normal circumstances. The problem is Attack Deoxys, which has the exact same role but does it so much better with even higher attack stats and the same speed. Yes, it's got pulp-like defenses that can't take any reasonably strong attack, but that's kind of the whole point. Rather than have some kind of even spread of stats so that other forms can specialize in one or two, normal Deoxys is just a worse version of Attack Deoxys with similarly terrible defenses and therefore unable to carve out its own little niche. You take it over Caterpie, but when changing forms is so easy, and when you can't have two of the same Pokemon in the same team, why would you ever use it? Still a DNA alien Pokemon with double helix arms, so it's not a complete write-off. Could use some work though.
I don't know about you people at home, but my personal favourite type of legendary Pokemons are the ones that have no impact whatsoever on the story of the Pokemon game and just kind of exist in the overworld for you to mosey on over and pick up at some point. Some games will have like checklists of legendaries that you need to go around and pick up, and sometimes I enjoy doing this. As long as they don't take the piss.
I reckon we'll be alright for now, but watch this space because we'll quickly be tripping over all manner of random legendaries that show up uninvited and expect to be treated with the same reverence as the box mascots. I'll give Heatran a bit of credit then, because at least Gen 4 puts a tiny bit of work in to link it back to the story in the post-game. More so Platinum than Diamond and Pearl though. He's an angry volcano monster who sleeps in Stark Mountain and only wakes up when someone brings the magma stone into the same room as him. And hey, I know that's not exactly Shakespeare, but I like a bit of mythos to my really important legendaries. put the effort in now, and he gets paid forward later. That's sadly where the good stuff ends, because I honestly forgot about Heatran before making this video. His name and design do little to persuade me that he isn't just a generic volcano monster with a typing that is unique and interesting, but isn't taken advantage of as much as I would have liked. I imagine a fire steel type to be some kind of metallic beast that is constantly reforming under its own intense heat, like Melmetal but a fire type. It needs to be something a bit more interesting to justify a gaping weakness to common types like water and ground, because otherwise it's a pain to use and too easy to forget. Put it back in that volcano and give it a few more minutes. I'm always a tad bit concerned whenever there's some kind of trio of Pokemon revealed. It happens a lot since there's been a lot of legendary trios throughout the generations, and of course, lots of starter Pokemon to digest, and actually, the starters are a really good illustration of my issue with these trios. Usually you'll have an attack Pokemon that leans towards attack and special attack, a defense Pokemon that does the same with defense and special defense and sometimes HP, and then you'll have the weirdly balanced Pokemon. Maybe it's just my love of glass cannons or bulky utility Pokemon, but I've always disliked Pokemon that have stats that are fairly average across the board. Obviously this is a somewhat good idea for staying afloat in the average battle, but not having a specialized role can often hurt a Pokemon's usability. And when Azelf is a speedy attacker and Uxie is a defensive wall, what's the point of Mesprit? To chase the fucker around the plains of Sinnoh, that's what! Someone tell me why Azelf and Uxie stay in place when you find them, but Mesprit decides to yeet off into the farthest corner of the world for you to come hunt it down, only for it to flee and run away just as quickly? I'd probably be alright with Mesprit being this mediocre jack-of-all-trades Pokemon, but the fact that I have to care enough to go gallivanting across the whole region to nail this bastard down is pushing things a bit far in my eyes. I don't know what to do with Mesprit, and I don't think anyone else knows either. I've got all these stats and have distributed them like a moron. What do you expect me to do with all of this? I hate mythical Pokemon so goddamn much. I get the idea of adding new Pokemon to a game, like some kind of alternative DLC where you go to a local game store to pick up a code or download it from a special event, but the problem is that Game Freak is stuck deciding just how much work to put into these Pokemon. On the one hand, we have Volcanion, who has a unique typing and pretty cool design that is sadly wasted on a Pokemon that few people will ever own. But on the other, we have Zeraora, a pointless Pokemon farted out at the end of Gen 7 with its disappointing and bland typing. So should I be mad that Zeraora is so underwhelming, or pleased that Game Freak didn't bother putting much effort into a Pokemon that no one would care about anyway? I don't know, but I need something to be angry about, so it doesn't really matter. Statistically, Zeraora is actually pretty good. He's a fast piece of shit that has stats that are appropriately distributed in a way that other Pokemon with 600 tend to waste, but I'm not so sure that's really the problem here. Despite its potential to be a potent threat with the right matchup, I've never seen anyone really acknowledge that Zeraora exists or has a function within the Pokemon roster beyond being an add-on that came out months after Ultra Sun and Moon. The weirdest thing is that a lot of these mythical Pokemon are introduced just so they can be star of an upcoming movie, and Zeraora is no exception, making its debut in the 21st Pokemon film, The Power of Us. Could these films use more well-known Pokemon so that Game Freak doesn't have to create one from scratch specifically for this role? I mean, yeah. But then you wouldn't be able to market the shit out of this new movie by saying that it features a never-before-seen Pokemon in it. Maybe that's just me thinking a little cynically, but this is hardly the video for me to be overflowing in optimism. Sword and Shield will have shitty, pointless mythicals, and I think we all know it. I don't need to remind any of you how far we are down the rabbit hole of Pokemon now. Not only are we coming dangerously close to reaching 1,000 Pokemon in the overall roster, but logically, that also means that we've had a hell of a lot of legendary Pokemon in there. By that thinking, you could likely suggest that attempting to remember every last detail among the 70-odd legendaries out there was always likely to be a nigh-on impossible task. Gen 5 didn't have the most new legendary Pokemon, but playing through it, it did feel like it had the most superfluous legendaries that I would struggle to care much about. Designing Pokemon based off of the Three Musketeers seems like such an interesting idea, but I'm not sure how much care I can give to that concept. especially when two of them look really cool and the other one pales in comparison to Breloom. Fucking Breloom! I like to think I'm down with the kids of today, or at least the people who were kids back when black and white were relevant, but I could not for the life of me remember what the other member of the Swords of Justice was. See, I remember what their collective name was, for fuck's sake, but the green guy? I knew it began with a V, but that's not a lot to go on. Virizion is a perfectly serviceable Pokemon with a chunky special defense stat to ward off some of the many threats to what isn't a great type combination for staying alive. Seriously, if a flying type just looks in Virizion's direction, it's probably gonna go down really quickly, and you could argue that you'd get the same outcome of any of the other 5 types that can run through it with ease. It's a nice idea, but I don't think it works well in practice. Mind you, some of the other Musketeers take damage from a billion sources, but at least they can dish it out as well. Defensive-minded legendaries aren't all they're cracked up to be sometimes. It's so weird to think that Kanto's legendary birds were the first legendaries that a whole generation of Pokemon fans ever saw. I know Mew and Mewtwo are more iconic and may have been a part of the marketing that ultimately convinced small children to get these games as soon as possible, but Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres had the important job of introducing the concept of rare, powerful Pokemon with catch rates so low that you'd spend the best part of an hour fruitlessly chucking balls at them. But it's been many years since those days, and while I can admire this trio for the great work they did, I can also criticize some of them for being shitty Pokemon, and how completely irrelevant Moltres is now. Joke's on you though, because Moltres has never been all that great. Design-wise, it's probably the most impressive of any legendary bird, and I'll never ever forget seeing it in 3D for the first time while playing Pokemon Snap and feeling my jaw hitting the center of the earth. But aesthetics can only get you so far, and they're not very helpful in a fight against other Pokemon. Moltres is a well-rounded attacker with evenly distributed stats, with special attack getting slightly better treatment than any other stat, but crucially, it doesn't have enough speed to get the most out of any of this. It's also a fire-flying type, which is a devastatingly terrible type if stealth rocks are in play, and a generally terrible type if you want to stay alive longer than 15 seconds in the average Pokemon battle. Looks cool, but time has not been kind to Moltres, especially since it was outclassed one generation later when Ho-Oh came to town. Still gets a run out in Smash Bros though. Legendaries are a golden opportunity for Game Freak to try new things. They can get away with some slightly off-key designs and strange typing, since these kinds of Pokemon are already distinct enough to have a natural separation from the rest of the roster, and I think it's helpful if there's a bit of variety within the vast array of legendaries themselves. So, when the first 2 generations are filled with mystical birds and dogs and cats, I suppose, I'm all for Game Freak rolling the dice and deciding that otherworldly elemental golems should be the heading for Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald. And I like the Regis a lot because they've got a distinctive look, an awesome battle theme, and I even enjoyed the Mew Truck-esque conspiracy theory disguised as actual steps that you had to take in order to find the bastards. That's kind of where the good stuff ends with Regice.
With the recent release of Sword and Shield, we now have a legendary Pokemon for every single type in the game, which I feel is very important for ensuring that there's some variety in there, and that not every legendary is some variation of some kind of flying bird monster. Regice is not the first Ice-type legendary, but it was the first legendary that I saw that made me think, maybe they're not all that great.
If you gave Regice's stats to a better Pokemon, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's obvious what was attempted here, with Regice having large defensive stats, with special defense being almost comically huge, so that it can act as a nearly impenetrable wall of ice to complement the other similarly defensive-orientated chunks of steel and rock. While those other 3 types might sound like they belong together since they're all sturdy materials in real life, there's a huge difference in the defensive qualities of rock and steel and the inherent fragility of the ice type. It only resists itself and is weak to 4 other types, so Regice's defensive potential is wasted and easily bypassed since fighting rock and steel have a ton of physical attacks to target Regice's weakest stat. It says a lot when Regice is weaker to the other 2 Regis, and perhaps a sign that Game Freak didn't think this through thoroughly enough. If only this was as stupid as the Regis got. We all know it isn't though. So it's safe to say that Ice doesn't make a great type to build a defensive monster around. It's weak to a lot of things, and even some absurdly skewed stats won't do much to change that, so I'm not sure why you'd ever make a legendary Ice type that focuses on taking hits. Maybe if you gave it a lot of defense and special defense, you might be alright, but Articuno is disappointingly balanced with a stat distribution that isn't too dissimilar to that green guy I've forgotten the name of again. So it's trying to be a defense-minded Pokemon, but with stats that don't necessarily let it without a lot of outside assistance and setup. Oh yeah, everyone's favourite. Although, like Moltres before it, many people like Articuno because of its elegant design that, even with Gen 1's horrifying depictions, looks pretty decent all things considered. I don't hate Articuno despite what its position at number 3 might indicate, since in the late 90s it was a bit of a beast back when the special stat wasn't split into attack and defense, and it could Ice Beam its way through most of the game, and right through the middle of the Elite Four and Lance's Dragons. Unfortunately, we've come a long way since then, and now we've got more Pokemon that can annihilate Articuno in a heartbeat, and come to think of it, more options to consider ahead of Articuno. Power creep is always something to ponder where new Pokemon are added that are designed to make earlier ones obsolete, and while I don't think this was Game Freak's intention, it was always likely to happen when Articuno set the bar so low. You take an Ice Flying Wall into any Pokemon battle and be prepared to weep as Stealth Rocks takes away half of your health in an instant. It's about 20 years out of date at this point. For all of my criticisms of some very underwhelming legendary Pokemon, at least most of them are fully conceived. Game Freak had a stroke of inspiration and decided to base a rare, powerful Pokemon on some significant piece of mythology or symbolism in order to give the roster a hierarchy that players would feel proud of if they ever caught them all. I can look over every previous Pokemon in this list and think, yeah, I can appreciate that Regice is an ice golem based on Hebrew stories and that Mesprit is the emotion Pokemon apparently. Okay, I guess. Zygarde follows in the footsteps of Xerneas and Yveltal by taking ideas from Norse mythology by referencing various aspects from Fenrir the monstrous wolf to Hel, the ruler of the Nordic underworld. And yes, I absolutely want Pokemon based off a shit as awesome as that, but I am gonna need you to elaborate a bit.
It was just sort of assumed that Pokemon X and Y would get a third game at some point, not least because that's the tradition we've been doing for many years now, but also because the titles are literally leading in that direction, and we've got Zygarde, which is a very distinctive design. We need a game to really look into that and decide how it's important, why it's important in the Pokemon world. Or we could just move on to Hawaii and see if anyone notices.
Pokemon Z is one of the greatest missed opportunities in Pokemon history, and I don't care what anyone else says. I enjoyed X and Y, but there was so much that went untold and unexplained, and no mystery sticks out more than Zygarde. In X and Y, you find this snaky boy at the bottom of Terminus Cave, and you're never given any in-game explanation as to why you should care about Zygarde, beyond it maybe being a semi-decent Pokemon that is ultimately overshadowed by Garchomp and any halfway strong alternative. Pokemon Z never came about, but Game Freak did try to expand on Zygarde by giving it other forms and bumping up its stats, but to do so, you'd have to explore every corner of Alola and gather the 95 cells and 5 cores to unlock Zygarde's ultimate form that just has a bit more HP. How can you drop the ball this hard? The standard legendary Pokemon has some pretty chunky stats. They kind of have to, otherwise they wouldn't be valued as the strong Pokemon that they're designed to be, and I really like how Game Freak has an avenue for some overpowered game design to run riot in a confined space. Pokemon like Arceus and Mega Mewtwo, and especially Mega Rayquaza, are demonstrations that Game Freak are perfectly content with torpedoing the metagame and seeing what kind of smouldering remains are left behind. My point being that these Pokemon don't need nerfing, and it's okay that they're a little too powerful because most legendaries are these days. So if someone could explain Regigigas to me, that'd be great. Your reward for gathering all of the Regis and taking them to a significant location where their master sleeps is a chance to catch Regigigas, a giant behemoth of a Pokemon with massive stats and the power to tow continents apparently. I'd love to see that bit in action because while Regigigas is a brilliant Pokemon in theory that you'd love to have on your team, for some unexplained reason Game Freak decided to nerf him into the ground by virtue of his signature ability Slow Start, where Regigigas has its attack and speed halved for 5 turns. So, an offensive powerhouse that had a base stat total of 670 is now crippled into the ground with a functional base stat total of 560. And no specialist role other than him sitting around for 5 turns and babysitting this giant until it wants to wake up. 5 turns in any kind of Pokemon battling, that's a long fucking time. It wasn't even the strongest legendary on paper in 2006. Why did you destroy him?
This is RabbidLuigi, and I often stay awake at night thinking very hard about how badly Sinnoh needs an update on its legendaries. Most of them are okay, but Regigigas clearly needs an update or a revamp or a rework, just something to give it some significance, and honestly it wouldn't be out of place if they just gave it its base stats and didn't fuck around with its ability. But also, Arceus kind of needs to reclaim a throne here, since you've got all these legendaries that are super important and way stronger than Arceus. It needs to be the god of Pokemon again. We need those remakes yesterday.